Hey everyone, Matt here with Nightrun Studio. Back in December, Willard turned 6 months old, and I decided to celebrate that milestone by releasing a devlog that showed how the puzzle platforming levels are coming along.
With that great foundation in place, I started adding more levels. Willard is not a Metroidvania, but it is going to have some similarities, like exploration with branching paths that allow for lots of discovery. I started developing my first branches in the path: an underground mine, a subalpine forest, a winding mountain path. But as I started designing these levels, I realized that there's still a lot of foundational work to be done before I can fully build my world. From the start, I wanted the exploration in Willard to be primarily about puzzle solving and exploration. I don't want this part of the game to be combat focused. That's what the village defense elements are for. But I do want my world to have a sense of danger, and I also want my game to feel cohesive. I can't have battles constantly raging at the village while the wilds nearby are totally void of enemies. Additionally, at the moment, my levels feel a little empty. While I am planning to add NPCs, they also need some enemies to bring movement and life to the world. So, I spent the last 2 months working on a philosophy of combat and figuring out what that would actually look like in practice. Here's how it went. Combat during exploration in Willard needs to be different from the village defense combat. While the mechanics of fighting will be the same, I want the village defense to be fast, intense, and chaotic as you try to survive the onslaught. Think of defense in Kingdom, or trying to survive a wave of attacks in Warcraft 3. For exploration, on the other hand, I want to keep combat feeling casual. Elements of Metroid, but with a little pinch of Journey.
I want the player to be able to explore at their own pace without feeling stressed out by constant enemy attacks or ambushes. I want battles to be something the player engages in because it calls to them, either because they're curious what the reward might be, or because they just want to solve the problem of how to defeat the enemy.
Early on in development, while I was still working on the concept of Willard, I threw together a quick combat mock-up. In addition to weak graphics, this combat was lacking in a host of other areas as well. That said, this early version convinced me that I was capable of creating combat, and it also helped me work out some ideas. At this point, I was definitely ready for a combat version 2.0. In my spare time, I started reworking my stiff attack animations, and during my more focused sessions, I began programming combat knowing there were a couple of things I really wanted. First, to maintain the casual feel of exploration, I want combat to be something that can either be avoided or at least engaged in when the player decides. Enemies will still lend a sense of vibrancy and danger to the world, but I want the player to be able to see them ahead of time and choose the time and place of engagement. Second, I want to try to maintain a puzzle-based experience during these encounters. This means that some enemies will have to be defeated using the environment, while others will have to be figured out, either by using their own movement patterns against them, or by discovering their weakness and exploiting it. So with a general philosophy of combat in place, I decided it was time to start prototyping some enemies and encounters. I knew combat would have to feel a lot more interesting than my earlier prototype, so I decided to more deeply engage with each aspect of battle. I teach a high school game dev class, and each term I have students who want to create a game with melee combat. I always warn them that it's complicated. They always try it anyways, and get super frustrated when it doesn't work. So I thought, why not do both at once? I'd get to know each part of the combat experience, and as I learned and improved upon it for Willard, I'd also create a tutorial explaining the concept. I started off by animating my character's sword swing, but with a twist. Instead of actually animating the sword, I animated the movement of his hand going through the arc of swinging. That way, I could equip any item to my player, add the sprite onto the sword hand, and I could swing any weapon I wanted while only having to animate the process once. Though I still had a little work to do on the actual animation, I loved the way this looked and how much time it promised to save down the road. Next, I added the ability to deal damage. When attacking, my player checks a circular area in front of him and then deals damage to any enemies within that circle. This is nice because whenever I equip a weapon with a larger range, like a giant axe or a spear, they'll automatically increase the radius of the circle so my player can deal a wider swath of destruction. With my attacks becoming more functional, it was time to improve the feel of combat all around. I added a knockback effect. I particularly like the way the enemy's velocity halts suddenly after being knocked back, as it gives this a snappy, immediate effect. I also added in some screen shake to make it feel a little juicier, some pop-up text to display the damage, and I also threw together a little script that would allow me to switch weapons on the fly, with the player's sprite updating to match the new weapon. I'm trying not to spend too much time on visuals this early in development, but the sloppy swing animation was starting to bug me. Since I was using the swing over and over for many different weapons, I decided it was worthwhile investing some time up front in making it look better. I touched up the animation, added a sword arc to really improve the feel. Although the recoil after the swing still needs a little work, I'm really happy with the way this is coming along.
With melee combat up and running, I put together my first 2 encounters.
The first is an old CRT monitor on wheels. More about the lore and why this 80s tech keeps emerging in a later log. The CRT machine would be a rough equivalent to a Goomba in Super Mario or a Crawlid from Hollow Knight. This is a basic enemy. It offers minimal threat, follows a predictable movement pattern. It offers a good introduction to combat because of the low threat, and it can usually be avoided altogether. To spice things up though, I added a force field that can be deactivated by Willard's anima attack. This provides some element of puzzling, as Willard will have to conserve an anima charge in order to use this ability. My second enemy is modeled after an old IBM 5150. Rather than moving until it hits something, this slow-moving enemy patrols between predetermined points. If the player moves within range, it fires a dual shot of 5.5-inch floppy disks. Like the CRT monitor, this machine is also capable of using a shield to provide extra challenge and puzzling opportunities. Adding some combat basics and early encounters to the game has definitely breathed a little more life and complexity into Willard's exploration. It's also revealed the need to do more foundational work before I can do much more level design. Now that I have combat, I need an equipment system to manage it. I need to decide how I handle sprite swapping and just how far I want to go with changing my character model after equipping new items. Doesn't this boxer-clad Willard just beg for infinite customization? I'm going to need a fully functional inventory system to manage all this. I'll have to adjust my save system to include all this new equipment and sprite customization. Yep, there's a reason I'm estimating this is going to take 5 years to make this game. But I'm still loving it. Next up, I'm going to get to work on that inventory and equipment system. And the plan after that is to tackle my sprite customization on equipping new gear. Thanks so much for taking the time to check in with the development of Willard. I love that a growing community is taking interest in this project and taking the time to let me know what they think about Willard so far. Till next time, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.